And we are live. JT here, and welcome to the Huddle. The Huddle is where I sit down with successful people from the world of sport and coaching. It's to learn more about their journey to greatness. Why do I have these conversations? Because success always leaves clues. I want to take a moment to thank you, whether you are watching on YouTube or whether you're listening to the audio on the podcast. Thank you so much for being here with me and my special guest today. And here's my friendly reminder to you. The mind is like a parachute. It works best when it's wide open. So my challenge to you is to go all in on this conversation, to remove any distractions and get laser focus on the here and the now. And I guarantee you, you will gain a valuable nugget of wisdom that will not only help you succeed in sport, but more importantly, in the game of life. Been looking forward to my conversation with my special guest today. Part of the intention behind this series in the Huddle of the Huddle Revisited was to bring back special guests that have been on there that have already shared their journey to greatness, but then just to see what's changed. What have they taken away as they've continued to walk along their journey? My guest in the Huddle today is a good friend. He's currently serving as the head coach at the University of Windsor for their football program. My guest in the Huddle today is Coach JP Circelli. How are you today, brother?
I'm great, JT. Thanks for having me on as usual. And I love to see the shirt that you're rocking. That's awesome.
No, hey, I appreciate you, Coach, for rocking it. And you know what I love about this shirt? Just such a simple blue collar gold swagger. Again,
That's
just
it.
that willingness, right? As we were talking about before we went live, just do the hard work. That's it.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay, Coach. So I'm curious. One of the things I always like to do in the Huddle is take a moment to count my blessings. For me, it's a daily practice. Some days I do it better than others, but I do find those days where I'm most intentional, I'm most consistent counting my blessings. I do find those days are filled with a little bit more love, a little bit more joy, a little bit more peace. And I'm a big believer, biggest blessing you can give anyone is your time and energy. So just want to thank you again for blessing me and blessing us with your time and energy here today.
Well, I appreciate that. And thank you for having platforms like this. So other coaches, leaders, teachers can really share their experiences, and hopefully people listening can take away a nugget or two that can help them on their journey.
Absolutely. Love that. Love that reminder of nuggets. And again, probably speaks to you essentially, although you're a great football coach, like myself, you're an educator at heart. So
Absolutely. Yeah.
so I'm curious, as we were saying as we kicked off, as we hit record, we were talking about this idea of, this series within the Huddle, these revisited, were to really look back on the journey of what has brought us here. Now, if we're just looking at facts here, it's been an interesting transition watching what has happened in Windsor around the Lancer football program the last few years. It's interesting if we just look at it in terms of strictly wins and losses. You look at it, it's 2021. You get a 2-4 season. Where this most recent season, we finished 7-3, and all of a sudden, it's this interesting one where what's going on in Windsor? But as you and I both know, we've had lots of great conversations over those years. I'm curious, what have you taken away as you look back on the journey over the last few years? What's been a takeaway for you?
Really, one of the biggest takeaways has been something we talked about the first time around, but it really hits home, is surrounding yourself with great people. Anytime you take on a major project, and in our case, it's coaching, but it could be a variety of different areas where you need to maybe change a specific culture, change a narrative. You have to know that you can't do it alone, and you have to surround yourself with great people who can do maybe specific jobs that you're not as strong at, can help fill some of the gaps. And essentially, we talk about it all the time. It's having the right people in the right seats on the bus. And as much as we want to say it's a people business, there were people before us, there'll be people after. It's about having those right people doing the role that's right for them. And then as a leader, letting them grow, thrive, do what they do best. And I mean, I'm not sure exactly who came up with the line, but we talk about it quite a bit. You'll be amazed at what you can accomplish when you don't care who gets the credit. And that's a lot of the selfless attitude that we have on our coaching staff. And at a bigger scale, seeing in our athletic department and with the support of our athletic director and our dean.
Mm. Love the simplicity of that, right? It's about, like you said, and I know it's something you've shared in our personal conversations offline. I know that's something you've shared, on other podcasts. That idea, like getting the right people on, in the right seats on the bus. I'm curious, you've been doing this for a while. You've been coaching at many different levels within our beautiful game. You've been in the leadership at multiple different levels. Has that been a lesson that you've always understood, that, getting the right people on the bus in the right seats, or is that something that's really you've just developed a greater understanding over your journey?
Probably a combination. I think what makes my own personal journey different than a lot of other people's is, I started right at the grassroots. I mean, I was coaching London minor football, and then I went the route through high school and coaching camps, and then coaching summer football at all the different levels. And anytime there was an opportunity to coach, whether, it was going to a higher level like Team Ontario, you take those opportunities and you get as many experiences as possible. So I think along the way, you realize certain people have strengths
Mhm.
and other people um, might be better at other areas than what you are, and you got to try and learn from them and work with them. And I know, at least with our coaching staff, having people like my brother Joe Circelli, he's one of the smartest, not just offensive, but offense and defensive minds, I believe, in the country. He could coach a variety of positions. Pat Donovan, and I think a lot of people have talked about his expertise and how he could easily have gone to a few different programs and been a head coach at this point. And that really speaks volumes to having two great coordinators that love the position that they're in. They love coaching with great people. And, whether it's our offensive line coach, Randy Beardy, who's really been the heart and soul of our program, Nathaniel Bikela, who's our recruiting coordinator, has done a great job with special teams. Isaiah Johns, over the last few years, really taking a strong leadership role in our defensive secondary, but also with recruiting. The role he's had in Team Ontario, I think's been significant. And again, similar to my own journey, here's a player that maybe didn't get all the accolades as a player coming through, but understood, hey, I want to teach, I want to coach, and continues to thrive as he keeps taking each opportunity. And
Mhm.
of course, someone like my father, Mike Circelli, having that kind of expertise. Um, there's no substitute for experience, and he brings a lot of it. The coaching end is one thing, but the work he's done in transforming our locker room, transforming a lot of things that we do on the field. Again, you just need good people who can do certain skill sets. And the fact that we've got a number of community coaches that have played here before or now getting into teaching, I mean, that's really what it's all about for us, is continuing to not just drive the culture within our own university community, but it's making sure that the Windsor community at large is taken care of. Because obviously, with the way things went 3, 4 years ago, a lot of programs are still trying to recover from COVID, and we need more and more like-minded individuals to take on a bigger role.
Mhm. And I'm curious your perspective on this. I think one of the unique things about like Windsor is there has been this consistency since you stepped into the role. Like you said, you've surrounded yourself with, diverse skill sets, diverse experience, people from diverse lived experiences, but you've sort of allowed them or sort of created those opportunities for them to really share and amplify their natural gifts, their talents, their abilities, their skill set. Um, has that what is you seen as the benefit? Like, is that easy is it easy to sort of identify, or is that kind of like an ongoing process of how do you do that? Like, we're constantly sort of structuring these roles.
Yeah, I really believe it's ongoing, and it's something that you learn through experience. And when you have a more experienced coach that has shown that they can take initiative and do things on their own. You let them run with it. But at the same time, if they're not doing what you need them to do and it's outside of what your core values or what your philosophy as a teacher are, then you got to pull it back. The hard part in that is, can you give up the power that you have as a head coach and say, okay, I want you to take initiative. I want you to take on new responsibilities and run with this. At the same time, I know for myself, sometimes I feel like, do I give too much runways? There are times I've got to pull back and say, okay, this isn't working, or we have to adapt to this and make sure that the path we're going on, we'll have to alter it a little bit to make sure that we're getting the results that we're looking for. It's a very difficult challenge because I don't think that type of leadership has existed forever. I think a lot of times, especially in a sport like football, it's been very authoritarian and it's top down from the head coach. And part of that still has to exist, but being able to empower the assistants and show that there's this trust, this vulnerability, really goes a long way in creating an environment where everyone wants to work. I look at it, if I was second guessing or micromanaging everything Pat Donovan or Joe Circelli did, they probably would have left long ago, because it's not an enjoyable experience if someone's constantly looking over your shoulder and second guessing.
Mm.
So sometimes they might do things that I wouldn't do, but that's easy to jump on and say, oh, I could have second guessed that. But when they come up with things that I didn't even think of, or wow, this makes us so much better, those are the ones you really want to celebrate. It's easy to dwell on the chances people took and it didn't happen.
Mhm.
Um, I'm more of the type where I say, I want you to take those chances. And if you're going to make a mistake, you go full out with that mistake, and we'll learn from it and go from there. But to play conservative, to play safe, it's very difficult to get results. And I think the biggest thing is you have to be comfortable in your own skin as a leader, knowing that other people will get credit, and you want to go out of your way to give that credit to make sure that um, they feel value, because no one's going to go above and beyond if they don't feel value, if they don't feel like they're a necessary component of the program. So I think that's a big piece that leaders are always having to work on. Yes, you want to be able to give um, that responsibility, allow that initiative to take place. It still has to work within your confines and what your core values are. So when do you pull back or say, okay, we got to pivot and go another way? But if you don't give that type of autonomy at times to your other leaders or the people that are, within your program, they're not going to want to stay. And it's a tough lesson to learn. And I think that's why I say it's kind of always something that you're constantly tweaking and it's moving about, because there's times where, hey, this worked really well. There's times this didn't work well. How do we pivot to make sure that we can make the necessary changes? Or was it something kind of out of our control? And we got to look at, okay, maybe we start over and say, okay, maybe this pathway makes more sense. So I
Mhm.
think constantly reevaluating what you're doing is a big part of it. But the big piece, you have to be comfortable in your own skin, knowing that other people will get credit.
Mhm.
And my role as the leader of the whole, you know, the entire organization is to take that heat when things don't go well and pass on the praise whenever I can when things are going well.
Mm. It's interesting you share that because again, I had this vision of like this beautiful dance of leadership, right? Where it's, a big part of being an effective leader is constantly building those bridges of trust, right? Like giving those, these simple focused actions and allowing people to win, very often, sometimes they'll lose, but that's okay. We'll learn. But then also discerning, like, is this actually helping us get to where we want to go? And then sort of like, okay, if it's not, then we need to shift our focus. When do I need to step in? So I really love the idea of like the ability to give trust, but then also discern, like, are we actually like getting to where we say we want to go?
Yeah, there's always got to be that accountability piece. And that's the tough part, because I think sometimes coaches, at least in my generation, it was pretty, black and white, that there's one voice, there's one leader. And, when they say jump, you say how high. But this newer generation of student athletes are asking the why question, which I think is important. because as teachers, we have to be able to explain it better. And it can't just be because I'm in charge and that's just the way it is. But if you want that buy-in throughout and you want that culture to permeate, again, I can come on here and tell you all about our core values and what our vision and mission and all that is. But it means nothing if the other leaders in our program, the other coaches, can't share that message because it has to permeate throughout the organization, the other student athletes, and they have to be able to say that message as well. And that's probably one area that I'm constantly thinking about. How do we tweak this or offer it in another way so it's so much easier for our players to not just comprehend and digest, but how can they share that message? Because I'm not going to be everywhere.
Mhm.
And as the head coach, you're not going to have as deep relationships as some of the positional coaches. So how does that message permeate throughout the team? You've got to make it simple, but at the same time, there's got to be impact and there has to be meaning. So I think that's the constant battle that you have. You have to reevaluate and you have to look at, are people really getting it? Is it having more meetings? Is it coming up with new mediums to share that? I think that's a big one I always look at whenever we have a specific message we're trying to get across. This group especially is so much into the media. So do I have a 5-minute clip or a 2-minute clip, a video of a leader? Is there something I can use from popular culture in a movie or a sitcom that really hits the point home? It's just so much more impactful than me standing up and constantly going through, hey, this is what you should be looking for. But I think if you can strike the right balance and have some of your coaches share their experiences, that's probably where the deepest impact has been. And just speaking with our leadership group, that's a big part of, hey, it was awesome when this coach was able to share because we had no idea they were going through this struggle. And it opened up a lot of ideas that the rest of us maybe didn't think or did have. And now we feel like we're in a safer space going forward. So a lot of that vulnerability is important. And again, it's empowering other leaders to speak and share their story.
Mhm. It's interesting as you share that, and part of it, and I'll just give you some context. During our first conversation, I remember when you were sort of talking about like you know, your core values, right? And the core values of the program, this idea of love, serve, and care. What really stuck out to me, and it's something I still at top of mind today, is like what does this look like in action? What does this look like in practice? Because, as you know, as someone who is a lifelong learner, every company, every organization has like things they say is important.
Right.
It's not embedded within your daily practices. If you're not showing people those things through your actions, kind of just words. So I'm curious, how has that journey been involving? Like you're very clear on what the pillars of Windsor are. The other coaches are clear on what those pillars are. What has it been like to slowly integrate more of those pillars into daily actions and practices?
That's really what separates, the good from the great. You got to come up with a plan to execute because I can talk love, serve, care. That's great. How do you put it into action? How am I demonstrating love on a regular basis? And you can see it in some of the success we've had with some of our student athletes. This year's past draft was a great example of players that weren't highly recruited or weren't highly looked at. We've developed them. We've put the time in, not just in season but off season, and we can push them to higher limits. We're able to do that. At the same time, we talk about when we say we're going to love someone the same way that their parents are going to be there for them. I think looking at the mental health initiatives we have, being able to meet with some of our student athletes and having different counselors on campus has been a big part of it. But just being able to open up our doors and sharing some of those stigmas and negative experiences that both student athletes and coaches have had has been a big part of it. From a serve standpoint, a lot of times we talk about modeling that service behavior, and so much of it is going out into the community. And the fact this is, we've been here for 4 seasons, 5 years, but 4 seasons, twice now within our own university. We've won what's called our IG Cup, which goes to the team that combines athletics, academics, and community service. So the football team had never won that before we arrived, and now 2 of 4 seasons we've captured that trophy. Speaks volumes to what we've changed from an academic standpoint, but also serving the community. And I think you see it just in the numbers alone. Like it's great to say, yeah, your program's winning now. But when we started, the attendance wasn't great. And now, we're third highest in the conference. We're averaging over 4,000 people a game. That just speaks volumes to what service in the community is all about. People aren't going to come and support you if you're not there. And if you're bad people and you're not doing things to make the area better. So because we've done that, I think that's another example of by putting in that time, knowing that it's not always what you know, but who you know, creating those connections, whether through volunteer work or other academic co-op opportunities, whatever it happens to be, connecting and using football to set up the next part of our life is huge.
Mhm.
And the third part with the care, that's always, where we develop that culture where we talk about sharing our most precious commodity, which is time. And we continue to have our culture meetings every Monday where, we meet for an hour to 2 hours and we talk about everything but football. And the topics range in so many different areas, whether it's talking about Black Lives Matters, whether it's talking about mental health, talking about owning your own 20 square feet, and getting those interactions between positional groups from an age standpoint, first to fifth year, but then also mixing them up and, meeting with, receivers, meeting with, defensive tackles, groups that would never engage. Those are big parts of it. To go a step further, I think a lot of teams talk about having a leadership counselor or captains. We start out with a fairly small group of 8 to 10 players, and we've expanded to over 20 to 25 at this point. And the idea being on Friday nights, we have these culture meetings where we go through an assortment of different books and come up with different activities to develop that leadership because so many people expect our top players to be leaders, but they've never actually been told how to lead. So having those discussions, putting people in positions that they haven't been forced to lead before. And in some cases, these are players that aren't seen as great leaders, but there's something within them. They have that charisma that they could be a great leader if we show them. And it's not just this is only for the good leaders. We've got to foster that leadership by showing them this is the right way to do it. When you lead your group this way to a negative pathway, you had a lot of people following. Imagine if we could do it for good and in a positive aspect, you could change quite a few people. There's a lot of people that would follow the way you do things if you knew the right way to lead and how to develop that culture within the team. So I think to kind of put an end on it, the biggest part is showing that vulnerability, showing people that you care by opening up, sharing those experiences. And that's how people start to trust you because, in a team of 100 plus, everyone's upbringing's a little bit different and not everyone's going to be best friends. But we talk about a brotherhood, we talk about a family atmosphere. The only way to do that is to hear other people's stories. And it doesn't mean that you're going to now be best friends, but you have a better understanding because his story told you a very different view of what maybe you thought he was going through. And in the same way, how you were brought up is maybe very different than what that perception is from your teammates. That's how you break down those barriers. But again, it takes time and you have to make that important. And not everyone's willing to make that important because they deem other areas important. For our program, we felt that that was a key to developing the family core values that we've talked about. And that's why it's something we continue to do to this day, whether we're one of the better teams or, when we were first starting out and kind of taking our lumps. We felt that this was the way to success. And it's something we're going to continue to do.
Mhm. Appreciate you sharing. And the really cool part is like being able to see it. Like it's interesting how you focus on things that are actually in your control, right? Like you talked about, that your 20 square feet, or just really at the end of the day, like being true to who we are, your pillars. Really, by focusing your time and energy there, it's funny how that old Bill Walsh, like the scoreboard takes care of itself
Right.
over time, right? I'm curious your perspective on this. You know, you mentioned trust a number of times, and I think trust is an interesting thing because we live in a world that trains us and conditions us that I've often heard like trust isn't given, it's earned. I guess I'm curious from your perspective as someone who's been in many different leadership roles, many different levels of our sport, many different institutions. Is it important in order to be truly the effective leader that you're willing to lead by giving others your trust first as a way to model that? Or do you like, I'm kind of curious what your thoughts around that are.
I personally believe, and I learned this early on, that I think one of the greatest leadership qualities is credibility. Do what you say you're going to do.
Mhm.
So essentially, you got to, walk the talk. So when we talk about, whether it's, looking at Simon Sinek's book, eat last. The guys see that I eat last. That's a simple thing that you can do, and making sure that everyone else is fed first. Um, when you talk about leading by example, like it's so we talk about that as the bare minimum, leading by example, because there's times people want to say, Coach, look at the good job I did. I was in study hall, I lifted weights, I went to class. Yeah, that's the norm. That's the expectation. That's what the leadership by example is. You need to be able to do those things. To go above and beyond, it's more than just modeling that, but that's a big part of it as the coach. I mean, when we first started at this institution, we did not have the talent to compete for championships. And so when you come from a program that's winning all the time, people want to hear like, how are you going to turn this team into a winner? Well, we're not going to win right away. And it's understanding where can we start having success. And a big part of that was the work we did in the community and the work we did in the classroom. And to have the number of academic All-Canadians we've had in a 5-year span is been pretty special. It's something I'm very proud of, because we said, here's what the standard is going to be going forward, and we're going to make it important. It can't just be a coach saying academics is number one. Yes, it is. And I think just about every coach would agree with it. But what are you doing to make it better? So in our case, it was, I'm going to sit down and go through the academics with our players, whether it's helping them with essays, whether it's teaching them some of those soft skills about organization, time management, working independently. Because so many of those skills, even though we want them to be learned in high school, it's just a different animal. Year one is, in my opinion, the hardest part of academics. It's going from this comfortable surrounding in high school where teachers are more than willing to show you, to a completely different environment where there might be a bigger focus on research, and it's a bit of a different business model. So it's not enough to just say, well, they got through grade 12 and now they know how to be a good student. It's constantly learning. I mean, we wouldn't do that from a football standpoint. We can just say, hey, you've made it. Here's a couple balls, figure it out. We're constantly coaching, teaching. We have film review and all that.
Mhm.
We need to do something similar in academics. And the hard part is, where do you find the time? So I think a lot of times people are looking at it, okay, you're putting all this time in academics, you're putting this time in culture, then do you lose certain times with football? Um, no, you got to try and balance it as best as you can. But I'm not going to sacrifice our culture meetings and our study hall sessions just to watch one more film session. That's up to us as the teachers to get that point across to our student athletes. This is what we expect from you, or this is what we're going to do going forward. So the priority piece is a big one. Um, but yeah, as a leader, you've just credibility, it just hits home so much. It was Jim Weiss that really taught me that when I was doing a master's, that it's all about doing what you say you're going to do, because it takes years and years to build up the credibility, and one poor judgment mistake and it comes crashing down. So it's something that's been built up over time. And our athletes know, I mean, not every day is sunshine and rainbows. There's times there's disagreements, but they know that again and again, myself and the rest of the staff have their best interests at heart, and we're going to continue to work on that and develop it. And I think a lot of times when you talk about, we like talking about our successes more than just the wins and losses. I mean, I know that's important, and that's why people continue to be employed, but I look at some of the draft picks we just had this past year. They were overlooked to begin with. Maybe not the best students initially, and now they're at a point where they're setting up, either graduating, getting ready for a master's, or they're um, in the process of teachers college, and now they've got this CFL career ahead of them. But just to see how they've turned their life around is a big part of it. By the same token, we've got players who've since graduated and they're starting families now. and they have to change their hat from, the student athlete to the husband, to the father. And seeing their success has been very rewarding. And then there's also the student athlete who, just this past year, a couple of them finished their MBA, and to see them employed right away and moving up the corporate ladder in such a short time. Those are where you measure success. And I think we've got to do a better job of showcasing those student athletes, because that's really what it's all about. When we talk about building better sons, fathers, husbands, that's what it's all about. Where are you seeing those successes? And again, to quote Bill Walsh, the scoreboard will take care of itself.
Mm. I love how you share about that. It's like finding those wins, right? And yes, the wins on the field are great. I've known you a long time. I know those do fire you up. But it's like, are the wins also, right, helping people, become better fathers, getting them into their MBA programs, getting them into teachers college, right? Or just being a model citizen, right? A great human being is so important. I guess the question is that I have for you is, do you think we're at a time where people are really understanding it? Like I feel like back, a few years ago where they talk about champions for life.
All right.
Everyone talks about champions for life, like you said, school's important, a student athlete, all this stuff. Do you think the narrative is changing? Do you think we have emerging leaders that want to truly be champions for life? Like they're asking for those supports. I'm kind of curious your perspective as someone who has a very good perspective on why we do this.
That's a tough question to answer, because on the one hand, I'm seeing the change, and there's more and more literature out there. And I think you've seen some coaches come out, and it's not like I've just invented this. This is stuff that other people are doing. But then on the flip side, you see that, especially if we're looking at like the NCAA model, where a lot is financially driven, and there's big money and big business. And the champions for life is a tough one. I mean, if I look at a pro model, like these coaches can't even coach for a year, and they're being let go. They don't have a chance to develop and put their teaching in place. So I get it. It's a different model looking pro to university, but I think the expectations, definitely if we're comparing NCAA to U Sport, are very different in what's driving coaches, what's driving these teachers, and what's driving the student athlete. So on the one hand, I want to say there's change for the better. There's more people understanding that we have to make these changes for the better, to make better people, make better citizens. But at the same time, if you're not having success on the field, you may not have enough time to create that message. And so now there's an extra emphasis on winning. I mean, if we even look at youth sports over the last couple of years, I mean, you're seeing 3 to 5 coaches change jobs the last few years. So in a league of only 27, you got to have results too. And that's the tricky part. So it's hard to tell a coach, hey, you're not valuing maybe your core values or academics, or something that should be more important because you're trying to win it. At the end of the day, it's our livelihood. So you've got to do what works best for you. I just know from my own personal experience, and maybe that's, just going through the ranks from minor football to high school to summer to where we are now. There's got to be more that drives you than just winning. That's at least for me personally. And knowing that there's a bigger picture to all of it, because the losing's hard. Losing games eats at you, whether you're getting blown out or it's a real close game. Like, it's hard to say one's better than the other. I know a lot of times people want to come up with that. Well, it's worse if you're blown out. It's worse if it's real close. They're always hard. They're always challenging. It's what do you learn from it going forward? And do you have that consistent message within your program? And I know, looking at our coaches and our student athletes, I can honestly say, hey, we're doing things the right way, the best way possible. It doesn't mean that everything's always perfect, but sharing all those success stories that we've had, I know we're on the right page, and we're going in the right direction, and that the winning is going to come. And I mean, each year it's happened, but there's definitely always self-doubt when things don't go your way or things don't turn out right away. And I think it's pretty natural to second guess and think, okay, do we have to pivot? Is what I'm doing the best thing? probably going with what you've planned out to do from the get-go and not changing every time there's a little bit of adversity is probably the best course of action.
Mhm.
But again, it's different because everyone's in a different situation. So it's hard for me to say this is definitely the right way to do it.
Yeah.
So, in a long-winded answer to answer your question, um, I do see more coaches talking about building champions for life,
Mhm.
but I don't know if we're going to keep seeing it because we're in a time where this instant gratification. We got to give leaders at least 3 to 5 years to get their message across. It just can't happen overnight. No one can walk in and in a month create a winning program. It can't happen that way.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, and as you should, I appreciate your very, candid and honest feedback, right? Like it's a great reminder that great things take time, right? It's like if we're planting a vegetable garden, you can plant those seeds. They don't just magically sprout into, magic vegetables, right, the next day. So you got to water it, you got to give it sunlight, you got to nurture it, you got to give it great soil. So it's a great reminder. Um, the other thing that you mentioned, I remember Coach Beardy when had him on the huddle a few years ago. I remember he asked me like, "What's success mean to you?" So I think it reminded me, and you kind of touched on it. This like you have to be clear on what success looks like to you as a leader, right? And I really love this idea of like what Earl Nightingale talked about. And he talked about this idea of success is the progressive realization of a worthy ideal. So why that has always resonated with me, like you talk about, is okay. So what is your definition of success? What does it look like? And if you are clear on what that is for you as a leader, you have to understand that because, like you said, it's going to be ebbs and flows. There's going to be wins, there's losses. But at least if you know what you're kind of aiming for, what that vision that looks like, at least you can have a proverbial North Star.
Yeah, that's just it. Making sure that what you believe in, you don't veer from it too much. And again, easier said than done. And I
Mhm.
know coming out of COVID in 2000 and 21, probably right after we spoke. Because when did we speak? We were in the summer.
Yeah, yeah, probably about like just under 3 years ago. Yeah.
Yeah. So I remember, it was tough because we took on a kind of a talent depleted team in 2019, and there was a lot of things that we had to go through. COVID hits, so that sets you back because you think that you're progressing in the right way and you can't really put your mark on it. You don't have a true off season. And right when we kicked off, we were at Waterloo. It was Trey Ford's last year, and I thought we did everything we needed to prepare properly, and we got kicked around both, on the scoreboard, but physically we had a lot of injuries. And I remember I had a lot of self-doubt at that point, thinking, okay, maybe everything that we've planned or we're looking at isn't right. Like maybe you don't really know what you're doing. Like all these things that you've planned and worked with the coaches and student athletes, maybe there's more to it than what you've put down. And we have a bye week and get back at it and stay true to a lot of things that we were doing. And then we knock off a great Guelph team that had just knocked off another top team. So that was a big win. And then obviously beating McMaster for the first time since the mid 90s, like those were all signature wins for us, saying, okay, we are going in the right direction. And then taking on the school from London, and they kicked us around pretty good, and they ended up winning the Vanier Cup. And it's this constant reminder of, you're never as bad as maybe you think it is, and you're never as great as you think you are. And just when you think you've arrived, disaster can be right around the corner. So you're constantly working and knowing that there's someone always putting in the time, there's someone always better, there's always someone pushing you. You really can't rest on your laurels. You have to constantly be working at improving in your craft, improving your relationships, whatever it happens to be.
Mm. So I'm curious, as you said, it's sort of the ebbs and flows, and it's been really, as someone who's been sort of watching the journey, it's been really cool to seeing you take the exact same recipe that you used in the OVFL, that you were part of at CCH, and part of some great MAC teams. Like it's really interesting to see that greater message and how you're helping to share it and show that this recipe does work. I'm curious as you head into the 2024 season, as you and the program are about to, is there any sort of thing at top of mind for you on this next phase of the journey?
I think the big thing that we talk about, we understand there's higher expectations for the program this year. But so much of it is how do we continue to foster that culture? How do we continue to foster the relationships? And one thing I think when you're dealing with a team that's now older, early on we talk about the 2021 season. A lot of these guys in their fourth year were freshmen and took some licks pretty early on. And there was that development phase, and they understood what disappointment looked like. They understood how hard they had to work to get that going. Now you're at the part where we're bringing in new freshmen who haven't had to go through those trials and tribulations, and they're walking to a much different program than what we were in 2021. How do you continue to have that message without saying, okay, well, we got to go back and they got to learn the hard lessons as well? I think it's what separates these great teams that are great all the time, the Lavals, the schools from London. How do they continually do that, knowing that you got to keep feeding this monster because you have success and now new guys are coming in. They didn't have to go through the hardships. How do you maintain that culture? And we're not even, on the same level as those programs yet, but this idea of how do we continue to foster that culture of a hardworking, a blue collar mentality when they haven't had to maybe go through the same steps that the veteran players have gone through. So I think that's something that we're very mindful of, and something that we have to not just continue with the hunger, but ensure that entitlement doesn't set in, to make sure that there's not this lax attitude that sets in. And kind of like what I said, is as soon as you think you've made it, the world has a way of making things even, and can kind of kick you in the face and bring everyone back down to real life in a hurry.
Mm. So is it really, it sounds like it's just going back to your fundamentals, your core pillars, right? Just do what you've done that's helped you get to this point and just take sort of just doubling down on it.
Yeah, and maybe more so than just doubling down, but I think it's goes back to what I talked about, increasing the number of leaders you had. So making sure that your coaches spread the message, so making it a simpler message for them. But that's why we've increased our leadership group to having so many more. And in some cases, individuals that aren't maybe seen as your traditional leaders, but we see something within them that can lead a group. We have to foster that and continue to develop that within them, because again, I'm not going to be at every single workout or with every single position group at every single training site. Like, it's just not going to happen. I'm not going to be out with them when they're hanging out at each other's houses. I'm not going to be out when they go out for dinner. How do you continue to foster? This is what our culture is all about. These are our core values. This is the Lancer way, so that they're talking about it. Because to go from good to great, it's when you have the athletes driving the leadership bus, and it's not just being told from the coaches. So that's probably the biggest challenge I see going forward, and something that we're always trying to see what's the best way to get that message across.
Mm. You just had this vision of, that delicate dance of leader. It's like slowly taking that step back so people step forward, and then kind of discerning, like, are they getting the lesson? Has the lesson been passed? Observing, and then if they are okay, can take another step back. Then they can. But again, sometimes you realize that, oh, whoa, probably too much. Got to take a step forward, right? So, again, beautiful dance.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So I'm curious, I want to be respectful of your time, brother. What can we do to help and support, Windsor Lancer football, the OUA U Sport football as a whole? Yeah, is there anything that, we can do to support you and the program, or anything within our beautiful game?
I mean, I don't know if it's really your responsibility to support the program, but I think football in general, the grassroots level, we got to continue to develop that. So one thing that I've talked with some different people about is the fact that we need to make it more, I don't know if accessible is the right word. Um, I still think it's probably the cheapest sport out there when it comes right down to it in terms of playing at a high level. How do we ensure that we still have the very best teachers, coaches making it happen, and knowing that our coaches have to be open-minded enough to say, okay, there's probably some coach training that I need to do, and being open to the fact that you don't know everything just because you played. That's where I really see we can take the next level is in the athlete development, especially at the youngest levels, but we have to be able to coach those coaches. And the more coaches that we can have involved, whether it's through the NCCP or other areas to say, okay, we're trying to grow the game at the youngest levels. And not to say that, flag has been great and to see the influx of women's football, all very positive steps. I think the big part now is can we further develop our coaches at the grassroots level, at the summer level, at the high school level, and that one's real tricky because you're dealing with people who are teaching as well. I think that's really the next step is coach development and making sure we have the best people possible teaching, not just knowing the rules of the game and what those key strategies and schemes are, but how to be great leaders, really understanding, give people a great experience, and they're going to want to stay and continue to grow in that sport because it's so easy early on to turn them off. And maybe we share it with a negative experience we had, and all of a sudden we've lost that individual. So to me, it would probably be coach development is the biggest piece that probably all communities can use going forward.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you sharing, and it's interesting that that's a conversation that, I've personally had with a number of leaders is, we have this next, I think there's a fair number of coaches like yourself and me who are, a couple decades in, they've been around the game, and then you have a lot of young emerging coaches. And it's like you said, how do you transfer some of this lived experience, this wisdom, and pass it down so they can empower the next generation, right? So part of that is coaching the coaches, right? And showing them there's different ways to do it. And here's what has worked, here's what doesn't work, but then sort of that, ongoing personal growth, self-development, self-actualization, right?
Yeah, a lot of it goes with that modeling and kind of one of the first questions you said is like how do you show that leadership? How do you build that trust? I know for myself, being heavily involved in the NCCP at a number of different levels, being a coach, mentor, having a mentor myself, being able to show people that, hey, this isn't something, as I know in the football community, it's probably not always seen as the norm or something that everyone should be doing. So the more that we can have our higher level coaches opening up, mentoring, leading discussion, making it available, the more it's going to be seen as the norm going forward and making sure that next generation coaches knows that it's lifelong learning. There's no one that knows it all. And being able to put the time in to make it happen. It's again, it's not easy.
Mhm.
And maybe part of it is making it more accessible for other coaches. That might be something we have to look at, but I really believe the coach development part is key to growing our game long term and knowing how many, great athletes there are in different pockets in Canada. We can do something real special for this game. We just have to have the right people leading the way and teaching the right parts of the game.
Yeah, absolutely, brother. So I want to take a moment to acknowledge you, brother. I want to acknowledge you for the great man you are, the great husband, the great dad, the great teacher, coach, mentor, but more importantly, the amazing human being you are. The one thing that I always laugh about is that it's interesting how we both had to make a pivot into a new professional journey for us to like develop a deeper bond and connection. But you're someone who, inspires me on a personal level. You're someone I deeply admire and respect. And I just feel so grateful that you're in the position you are because I know how many lives you're impacting and changing. So just want to thank you for just being who you are, brother.
Well, I appreciate that. And thank you for doing what you do. I mean, you spread this message to so many people. and especially the work you're doing with Team Ontario and the development of the younger coaching generation. I mean, we got a couple of them on our staff as a direct result of the work you've done. So thank you for that and continue that great work. It makes a big difference.
Thank you, brother. So folks, Coach Circelli dropped so many valuable nuggets of wisdom that will not only help you succeed in sport, but more importantly, in the game of life. But as I like to remind you every week in the huddle, knowledge is potential power. It's the consistent and focused application of great knowledge that actually helps you to create greater results in your life. So my challenge to you is to take one of these valuable nuggets of wisdom and go apply it to your life today. And as I like to remind you every week in the huddle, you are deserving of greatness. You are worthy of greatness. You are greatness. And my only ask from these conversations, if it resonated with you, if it touched your heart, then please share with a friend, a loved one, a teammate, just someone you think that would benefit from listening to these positive, inspiring, and empowering ideas. The more people we have listening, understanding, and applying these simple principles to their life, the more blessed this world will be. As always, love having these conversations with you in the huddle. Have a blessed rest of your day, everyone.